Mate, that is a big question because mindfulness has had a massive impact on my life. I only wish that I learned about mindfulness sooner.
We're talking to Rob Hills, the host of the Balanced Leader podcast. He's a well-being leadership author, coach, facilitator, and just a fascinating guy, an advisor to leaders and individuals who want to find insights into how they can become more skillful in their leadership and in their life. I met Rob when he was working as a team leader in leadership training for the Australian Federal Police. He was helping those within the AFP build their communication, their decision-making, their leadership skills, and promoting mindful approaches to this. At that time, he also wrote a book which, knowing him and his core values and the impact of the world that he was having, I ran out and bought. It was the first iteration of the Mindful Leadership Blueprint, a practical guide, and it is incredibly practical. Rob's here today to talk with us about some of what's in the guide and why it matters and what you, the listener, can do to implement this into your own practice, into your own workplace, and into your own life. So thanks for coming on, Rob.
Thanks so much for having me, James. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, mate, and hopefully your listeners find it useful.
I'm sure they will. I'm keen to know what initially brought you to mindfulness as a leadership practice.
It's an interesting conversation because for me, mindfulness and leadership were sort of almost running in parallel to each other. So I joined the Royal Australian Air Force when I was 18, actually. And I sort of knew that I had a tendency to get lost in my head. And it promoted a bit of ill mental health on my part. I'd heard about this thing called meditation, and I'm like, that sounds really interesting. But I'm also in the Defence Force, circa 1998 or whatever. I don't think I want to talk about this with my buddies. I'm not sure they'll understand. I may just open me up to ridicule, whatever. And it was probably, part of ego on my part to not talk about it. But I decided to learn about mindfulness, about meditation in private through, just reading a book or whatever. There wasn't much great internet back in those days, or ChatGPT where you could find the answers. So I started practicing mindfulness and meditation, and it was a really love-hate relationship. Like, I love the idea of it, I hated actually doing it. And for me, it was because I thought I had to blank my mind, and for whatever reason, I just couldn't do it. And I now find out, of course, you just can't. That doesn't happen naturally for people. So I sort of did it a little bit and, picked it up again and then dropped it or whatever. And all that time being in the military, the leadership was running in parallel. In my leadership practice, I was working in what we call a tri-service environment. So Army, Navy, Air Force, and then civilians all together in the same environment. And it really gave me an idea of what sort of leader I wanted to be. There were those who were very much command and control, but there were also those leaders who were leading with empathy, who were leading from their heart, and who were just doing it in a way that really resonated with me. And I'm like, that's the kind of leader I want to be. I still hadn't made the connection at that point. I still hadn't thought about how I would bring in mindfulness into my leadership. It wasn't until through wanting to feel a little less stressed at work that I started doing some mindfulness practices at work, that I started to think, I could actually probably do this when I'm having difficult conversations. I can incorporate this into my leadership practice, and wow, doesn't that actually make me a better leader? So it was sort of a very organic and messy, if you like, bringing together of the two concepts. But once I managed to put them together, probably, it took me a lot longer than most people figure this out. It really stuck and it really resonated, and I haven't looked back. Like, it's my style. It's what I find works best for me. I find it really, from an operational perspective, gets great results, but also very humanistic. And I can really get in touch with people on a different level using mindfulness.
Such a critical practice, and I find it's a cumulative thing too. The more you do it, and it doesn't have to be long invested hours, although that definitely helps, but even just the small accumulation of this just helps to integrate into creating a more calm presence, a more resilient and responsive as opposed to reactive style.
Yeah, absolutely. It is funny because I've seen, again, lots of different examples of this over the years, and it's the leaders who are a little bit calmer, who are a little bit more self-aware, who are reflective, who usually have better relationships in the workplace and are achieving better things, whether they're setting out to do that or not. It's because of their presence and the way that they're actually with people that they get those better results.
Yeah. I think the most important thing a leader has is their leadership identity and how authentically they can inhabit that. And that comes through that self-awareness. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of a lot of the people that I coach and mentor and facilitate for the senior executives, those in the political services or in the public service, or even politicians themselves. What's the pull for mindfulness? How can mindfulness help them be more effective in their role?
Mm. Great question. And I think it's really interesting when you pick up mindfulness and you start to do it, you almost see the benefits without even thinking about it. If we talk about, practical and pragmatic environments, that's where I cut my teeth. Trying to teach mindfulness in a policing environment, you get some pretty tough nuts in there. Very hard to crack. But what I found was that once I actually started talking about it, people were like, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more? I'm like, yeah, sure. And that's how the book came about. I was working in leadership development and we were talking about some pretty tough things,
Mm.
different scenarios, case studies, whatever. And I just sort of talked about some of my ways of coping with my mental health issues, with stress, and people started to really resonate with that. So I'd sit in the car park after work and I'd write down more notes and more notes. And eventually, after a while, my wife's like, that's starting to look a lot like a book, right? I'm like, it's not a book. I'm not an author. It's just some notes. It helps me get the thoughts on paper, and I can then analyze them and put them in order. I'm a very practical person, so that's how the book sort of came about. But I think what I found in a policing environment, and that's translated now, I've worked with public servants, people in private sector, all in different areas, is that you don't need a lot of time for mindfulness. You can incorporate it into your day. And I find that people think, it's another thing I've got to do. That's not the case. My understanding and the way that I talk about mindfulness and meditation, for me, meditation is a formal practice, whether that's sitting on a cushion, sitting on a couch, doing a walking meditation. It's what you're sitting there to do. Whereas for me, mindfulness is how I incorporate it into my daily life. So it's how I drive more mindfully. It's how I have more difficult conversations mindfully. It's how I brush my teeth more mindfully. You can incorporate it into just about anything. And it's just noticing when you're starting to get a little bit anxious, you're starting to get a little bit frantic or whatever. There's, lots of things happening in a person's day, and just going, that's interesting. I'm noticing I'm starting to feel, a little bit more ramped up here. Maybe I can just sit with that for a second and just notice it. And if I sit there without judgment and I just notice it, all of a sudden my stress levels just start to come down and down and down. And I go, isn't that interesting? I think for me, with mindfulness, it's about how you can incorporate it into existing practices in your day. So it might be something that you want to do, like a formal meditation practice as well. I have a formal sitting practice. Every morning I sit for 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the day, and I notice the benefits of that. But I also notice throughout my day, even if it's just going for a mindful walk or just pausing every now and again to go, okay, take a breath, be here right now, be present right now, has a massive impact for me.
And that's something that leaders can do. I also work a little bit with some politicians, even between your office and you get called to the chamber. That walk itself could be a mindful walk, or it could be a break, or the walk to the restroom, catching your breath, refocusing. These things are mindful practices that just bring about a connection with your internal world and a deeper insight and resilience.
Yeah, and look, and again, to talk about the book, that was the reason I wrote the book. So for people who want to go really deep into the background of mindfulness and meditation, my book's probably not for you. I wanted practical strategies that I could give to people. And if you think about, again, the environment I worked in, also being a veteran, I wanted to target, people in defense who also suffer from mental ill health for a variety of reasons. So I wanted really practical strategies that people could do. And one of those is, just like you said, it's walking between meetings. Instead of walking between meetings and just power walking and thinking about what are you going to do next, maybe just take a moment and just sort of take a couple of breaths and just notice your surroundings, really get in contact with your five senses and just be aware and do it without judgment and just notice the difference.
That part there, without judgment, there's that difference between judgment and discernment, and quite all right to notice the things that are taking place.
Yes.
But once you judge, there's that layer between you and what is, and it interrupts, as kind of a data geek, it interrupts the amount of data that you can receive because you're biasing it all.
Absolutely.
I like that.
Yeah. What's interesting, one of the things that I talk about is that we're almost in this epidemic of judgment, and we're just walking around and we're judging everything. We're judging the environment, we're judging the people we're seeing, we're judging how people are driving, we judge ourselves when we trip over, we're noticing the person in front of us and what they're wearing, judging everything. We're adding an extra layer that just doesn't need to be there. And sure, for 95% of your day, Go ahead, be judgmental, no problem. But for 5% of your day, maybe just pull back a little bit and see what difference it makes. And you might find that number increases.
Yeah, that's brilliant. When I first read the book, there were parts of it that just jumped out at me, and I underlined and I put little, bits and pieces through them because, like you, I write down to understand and to process thinking. There's a line that you've done about, I suppose, a quarter of the way through the book. You said, "We have a responsibility to the next generation of leaders to model a more inclusive behavior." And mindfulness and that lack of judgment enables you to do that, doesn't it? That inclusivity, that it naturally arises from the act of noticing as opposed to judging. And I think that's one of the things that's really pragmatic and a benefit to people. I'm a big fan of your podcast. Aside from that velvety, wonderful voice of yours, you've got some really compelling topics and a span of topics that dive into the research on burnout to how to unbusy your leadership schedule and everything in between. I'm keen to know, how did you come up with the idea for that podcast, and what's been some of the feedback that you've received on it?
Well, it's funny. Why podcast? I think because my wife said I had the face for radio, so maybe I started there. But I started the podcast because I enjoy podcasts so much. I love listening to them. I was listening to them for a long time before I started my podcast. It feels like you're having an intimate conversation with a friend, and there is so many topics and so many wonderful people out there giving stuff away for free, life lessons that just, constantly I'm amazed, and I'm writing things down, and I'm taking in all this information. And so I thought, I really want to give back. I want to give back some of what I know. I want to give back to as many people as possible. And if I can help just one person have a slightly better life because of it, well then, maybe my mission is complete. I actually wanted to start the podcast about 5 years before I started it, but I had this little thing in my head called imposter syndrome. And I'm like, who's going to want to listen to me? Why would I even do that? And then again, one day it was like, you know what, I'm just going to give it a crack. I'm going to give it a try. And it's less about me and it's more about the audience. So it's about trying to find as much wonderful information and deliver it in a way that I think will resonate with my audience, which is, again, very practical and pragmatic. But it's about trying to, in some sort of meaningful way, help people on the journey they're on. And so it is a wide range of topics. I don't just sort of focus on one area. It's across leadership and well-being primarily is the main focus. I suppose I've sort of targeted leaders a bit. I've tried to create a niche if I can in some sort of way, because I was working in leadership development, since 2012. So it's an audience I'm familiar with, and I'm familiar with their challenges and what makes them tick, and what better way to help people, because they are not necessarily the people who look after themselves first. Most leaders will always put other people around them first. They'll make sure you're looking after your well-being, yet they're the ones that aren't looking after their well-beings. So I really want to help them. And if you think about it, and you think about leadership as a force multiplier, and as you were saying before, our legacy as leaders is to help as many people as we can. If I can help create healthier leaders, I'm creating healthier workplaces. And then that's passing it on to the next generation, and they're going to have healthier workplaces, and they will become healthier leaders. We have to start somewhere, and usually the best place to start is with me and with my environment and what I can influence. Yeah, that's how it came about.
I like it. And it has that multiplier effect where if you can help one leader be that much more skillful, the lives of all those that work with that leader are going to be improved, and the product that they produce is going to benefit.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone knows the statistics around mental health in the workplace, it's not getting better. For me, leadership and well-being go hand in hand, and mindfulness is a big part of that. It's about trying to create healthier workplaces, healthier leaders by incorporating the well-being. It should be in there. It shouldn't be a separate subject or a separate topic. It's something that leaders should be constantly thinking about, how to improve their mental health and well-being, but also those around them as well. And that's where we're going to get those healthier workplaces. And that's where we're going to make that impact with the workplace health and safety issues that are currently happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got I call it my syllabus of life. It's the experiences, the things, the activities that I believe help me become a better person or help me connect more with humanity. Things like working in palliative care or even working in the correction systems, things like that that help me understand what it means to be human
Yeah.
more. I'm keen to know what would be things that you've done or books that you've read or experiences that you've had that would go on your syllabus of life.
Mate, that is a big question. I'm kind of like you. I'm kind of someone who reads a lot and enjoys just learning for the sake of learning. So I'm going to give you two. So
Okay.
the first one is, I'd be remiss not to say mindfulness, right?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be lying, because mindfulness has had a massive impact on my life. I only wish that I'd learned about mindfulness sooner, and I'd only wish that I'd actually talked about it sooner as well and shared my experience with others. I wish I'd learned from, rather than learning in by myself, trying to maybe bring some people along with me and talking about my experience. So mindfulness, definitely number one. The other one would be, relating to the books, is being a lifelong learner. The more I learn, the more I figure less I know. Like the more there's so much more to learn. And I kind of think that's part of my journey here on this planet, is to learn as I go, and I refine and then as much as I can pass it on to other people, because we don't come with an instruction book. And I certainly learned that when I had kids. There is no instruction book for kids. There's no instruction book for life. There's a lot of information out there. You kind of got to grab it all and put it together as you go. And so for me, lifelong learning, constantly learning about new things. Yeah, I'd encourage people, like, read, learn more, and just learn for the sake of learning, because there's so many wonderful things out there to know about.
I couldn't agree with that anymore. I'm a big bibliophile myself. Learning is critical.
Yeah.
But how do people get in contact with you, and where can they find your podcast? How can they order your book and work with you and benefit from your wisdom?
Oh, very kind of you. Thank you. Look, there's probably a couple of different ways. LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So I have my own website, www.robhills.com.au. And the podcast you can find on any of the major streaming platforms. It's the Balanced Leader podcast. But yeah, they're the three main ways.
Excellent. Thanks so much for coming in and talking with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, James. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Appreciate it. It's really interesting. Can you tell me more? I'm going down a path and then I'm off on a tangent and I'm over here somewhere, and then I'm like, oh, I started out over here, I ended up over there. But things just pique my interest for no reason at all. It's not necessarily just about well-being. Any topic at all, I just find things fascinating. The Judgy McJudge face syndrome. That's starting to look a lot like a book, right? I'm like, it's not a book. I'm not an author. It's just some notes. It helps me get the thoughts on paper, and I can then, analyze them and put them in order. I'm a very practical person.